calendar are considered by the library board to be routine and will be enacted by one motion without discussion. If discussion is desired, that item may be removed and considered separately. Are there any items that anyone would like to remove from the consent calendar and discuss separately? No? Okay, then if not, could I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
I second.
Thank you very much. So that's Don and Lester. So Dina, could you do a roll call on the consent calendar for us?
Okay. Don Hill, what is your vote?
Approved.
Dr. Lester Chin, what is your vote?
Aye.
Lisa Diaz-Nash, what is your vote?
Approve?
Elizabeth DeWinter, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Rodlyn Harris, what is your vote?
Approve.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, then let's move to public comment. And persons wishing to comment on any item not appearing on the agenda may submit to the recording secretary a request to speak form. State law prevents the board from taking any action on any matter not on this agenda. Your comments may be referred to staff for future review. Is there anyone, Dina, who would like to make public comment?
We do not have any attendees right now.
Okay, well then I will close public comment at this point. And I think, James, we are over to you.
Okay, I believe the first thing on the agenda is the age-friendly city update.
Yes.
Okay, so I met with Monica Lee and Vince Simonides on April 5th. They were wonderful to meet with, very reasonable, very thoughtful. And they were largely interested. So one of the things they emphasized was that they weren't so much interested in asking us to do specific new things, but largely interested in being able to know more about what we were doing and how to disseminate that information, such as ebooks, streaming, volunteering opportunities, materials delivery, and how seniors could access the training to use resources such as ebooks. They wanted to know the things like that we were doing that were of interest specifically to seniors, and how it could be better shared. One of the things that they're doing is, first of all, they said that they have a working relationship with the Daily Journal, and they would like to be able to speak to staff to get information on our programs, senior related or of senior interest, that can be written about in the Daily Journal. They're also starting their own newsletter, and Monica has already worked with Eric Groff, who does the ebook trainings, and she wrote an article for their newsletter already, which she allowed me to take a peek at and just to make sure the information was accurate. And the article emphasizes the things that I just mentioned, the tools that are available now during the pandemic, how seniors can get specific training, one-on-one training. And they also she also writes some in the article about the homebound delivery program. What they shared as things that they think, based upon their relationships and conversations with other seniors, that will be of interest to seniors, are more on-site programs at senior centers, something that we're looking into as part of an expansion of our outreach program, which is tied to homebound delivery as well as Mateo. And that will, we're evaluating just how much that will impact staffing hours, and likely it would mean that we would need to increase some hours to free people up from the desk. But we are aware that is something that is desired. She said seniors, from her point of view, are interested in more programs on history, particularly local history, perhaps live video of programs such as our lecture series perhaps continuing with some Zoom recordings that will allow seniors to view those programs remotely. And programs or activities that facilitate the sharing of experience and wisdom of community members. And we talked a bit about the stories that seniors have to tell. And I shared with Monica that, you know, we had done a program in Berkeley where it was actually done in partnership with the program that already existed in Berkeley called the Storytellers Project. And this is something that we will look to reaching out to them this year. And we recorded different members of the community sharing their experiences living there, growing up. Many of them were seniors. And it was a hit. And what we did was we set monitors up in the library in several places at the service desks, and we would air those videos on a loop so that anyone walking by could stop and hear one of their neighbors sharing their stories. So I thought the suggestions that they had were all very reasonable and all very exciting. And this is something that I'm very interested in. And I think it is something, because of the timeline, that we can really work with them on, because basically they said, there is no timeline. It's an ongoing thing. The city's on board. And this is something we want to use as a guide as we move ahead and think about what we do at the library. One of the things I'm interested in is the possibilities that it opens up for the library to collaborate with other departments such as Parks and Recs, and maybe bringing some of our programs to the senior center there. And I also plan to make the age-friendly cities a priority on our work plan. So each year, we typically choose three to five items that we make our main priorities on our work plan for the whole library, and then different divisions identify the ways in which they can contribute to that. Not surprisingly, one of the things this year was dealing with social justice and racial justice. So next year, a big priority on our work plan will be age-friendly cities. So that's what I have to report back on that, and let me know if anyone has thoughts or questions, suggestions.
Does anyone have any comments or questions for James? Well, I've got one point, James, while people are thinking. Are you aware that Vince and his wife have put together a map of the downtown San Mateo area and what everything was like over the past 100 years?
He may have mentioned that, but I'm not aware. I do know Jackie Simonitis, and she's volunteered for a long time with the city, but I'm not aware of that. And that's something I would love to follow up with him about. And what format have they done that?
They did it's a map that's, I think it might be on DSMA right now, the website, but Vince could tell you.
Okay.
But just in terms of, you know, who should you talk to for your stories? I think number one, he'd be a great one, but he would also have lots of other suggestions.
You know, the great thing about making it a part of our work plan is that we will give it concrete, I guess, what's the word I'm looking at? Concrete mileposts. And so we're going to set some concrete goals and say, you know, if we decide that it would be a good idea to do the storytelling project, or to do displays. And I know there's been conversations about displays on different neighborhood histories, et cetera. Then we can say for sure, did we do that or did we not? Right now it's wide open, but I know that we're gonna do some things on this, and that could be a good potential candidate. You know, the age-friendly, one of the things I like about the age-friendly cities, it is wide-reaching. I think they've actually even worked some previously with Eric, as well as a guy named Richie, I can't think of his last name, who does GSI for IT. And one of the things that they wanted to talk about, which was coming up with safe routes for seniors to walk to the library, you know, because, you know, we've talked a lot lately about getting seniors services where they are, but also in truth, and I think they supported this, for a large percentage of seniors, the value of the library is to be able to go there, the act of getting out of your house, taking a walk and being in a community. And this is one of those areas in which we can work with other departments, because obviously public works is deeply involved with making sure that we have safe walkways and safe sidewalks, and community development is deeply involved with shaping the future of our city and deciding whether or not it's going to be more walkable. So I'm very interested in the idea of the map. I think I have a great rapport with Jackie, and Vince seems to be the same. And I look forward to working with Monica and Vince, and I'm very, very open to their ideas. And I want us to have some tangible results in the next fiscal year that are directly related to the Age-Friendly City Initiative. I'm excited about it. So if there's nothing else, I guess I will move on to an update.
Lester, do you want to say something?
I do, but were you going to say something? Because it looked like you were going to say something, but then you're
I
on
was
mute.
just saying,
No.
does anybody have any comments? And I was muted, so I was,
Okay.
so please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the context for my comment is, in general, I'm a very firm supporter of like focus, and
Mhm.
you know, the city council has designated age-friendly as the focus for the year.
Mhm.
So however, like it sort of feels like, you know, last year's focus got, you know, just like everything else in the world, like derailed by the pandemic, right?
Mhm.
So like, you know, like you talked about displays for, you know, related to seniors, you know, there's no chance to have displays in the library, right? And that's, you know, not your fault or anything bad. It's just like the pandemic derailed everything. So I'm wondering if there's a way to, it's like my advice is, you know, can we look for ways to get leverage from the same thing? So as an example, if you're going to go out and try to do the storytellers thing and get seniors to tell their stories about how it was like back then, could that same mechanism be used to like get folks who have, you know, to talk about racial justice, right? So it's the same mechanism,
Yes.
but we're trying to kind of like play catch up on last year's topic, because last year's topic got derailed by the pandemic, right? So I'm just, you know, just find ways to like not take away from the focus of the current fiscal year, but kind of play a little catch up for last year's topic. So I think that's my first comment, and I only have one more after that. But
I can
James, you look at-
respond.
say something.
Yeah, I can respond to that. You're absolutely right. Obviously, we did not do a lot of. We actually did a good amount of programming, virtual programming. We did not do it obviously as much as we would have wanted to in a year like this. But I was going to share in my city librarians report that, you know, the cultural committees have all pretty much been dormant except for the African American Cultural Committee. And they've done a couple of events that, you know, have been moderately successful. But the first event was a conversation on racial equity and diversity and justice. And in focus, it was a panel discussion with CSM students featuring, led by their professor. So that was one that we did. And tentatively, well, I shouldn't say tentatively, it hasn't been released because it could change, but not likely not to. They're planning to do an event on May 20th, the African American Cultural Committee, on the history of housing segregation in San Mateo. And they've asked me to moderate it. And people have been reached out to, such as a city council person, Joe Goethals, has agreed to be a part of it. Former mayor, the first African-American mayor of San Mateo, Claire Mack, also a long-term resident. We invited David Bohannon of the Bohannon family. He has not responded, but we're waiting, and no one is obligated. We just wanted to make sure that people who may have something to say about it would participate. They also reached out to Richard Rothstein, the writer of the book, The Color of Law, and the writer of that article in New York Times that spoke on housing discrimination in Hillsdale. He's unavailable, as you can imagine, he's pretty busy. So they're looking for one more person to round that out, and they would like for it to be an academician who knows a lot about the history of housing in San Mateo. So yes, yes or no, there was definitely not as much done on that particular topic as we would like, and I do agree with you. Some of those things should be rolled over. However, the year's not over, and the expectation is that will be a pretty big event, and it will include some people who often don't get to talk about their experiences here in San Mateo, and it will also present some very real, honest, and tough truths about the history of our city, with an idea towards finally having a frank conversation about how we got to be where we are. And even in a really good city like San Mateo, how it has created deep, deep inequities, and what we want to do or try to do, or how might we work together to do better. So the synergy is there. I think that will also offer, like you said, that synergy next year, but there is still a plan to do that program this year, and we can see what we can carry over to next year.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that does sound like, thanks for letting us know about that May 20th program. That sounds like a really fantastic one. So I'll mark the date on my calendar.
Well, the marketing material should be going out soon, and I'm doing a lot of reading, and I am just trying to get prepared. And they asked me to do it because I have experience leading these sort of programs at the library, and because it is a very delicate, sensitive subject, and we want to make sure the conversation is constructive.
That's before my second final comment. I realized I had a question for Lisa. Lisa, who is Vince? I'm not familiar with who this person is. Earlier you mentioned that Vince had a map.
Oh, Vince Seminitis, the gentleman that James met with Monica. I know him because he and I are both on the Measure S committee together, but Jackie, his wife, is, as James said, very involved with the library as well.
Okay, thanks. So then the second comment goes back to James. You're talking about like walkability and how seniors, view, that's the community aspect of coming to the library is one of the things they cherish. Given that it can take a lot of effort and time to make cities more walkable, perhaps the community outreach vehicle could become basically a way to seed a different community gathering place, right? So I have an assumption that, if there's a place that's far away from one of the branches, but is more walkable and thus safer for seniors, the safety is there, but then what is lacking is like a focal point, like to coalesce a hub, and that the community outreach vehicle could, in the short term, be a faster way to create that. Like get there, if there's a schedule, it doesn't have to be at a senior center, but like, obviously this is like, as we're approaching higher vaccination levels and it's safe to gather, the vehicle could be the reason to gather, and as a way to create that community feeling, but in a more distributed way. That's, like you said, safer for seniors to get to, has broader reach, especially if people are, not able to walk very far, or don't feel comfortable getting on a bus or whatnot. It kind of brings the community to them, or creates little micro communities where they are. So that's just something I'd suggest you consider.
Absolutely, and we're interested in that. And one of the ways that can work is we can take MiFis on the van, and we can provide Wi-Fi. The challenge with that has been just staffing, and in particular, even before the pandemic, there was a question of getting more staffing that could be freed up to do it. But particularly with the challenge that we have had of getting a branch supervisor. And just to give a little history on that, the branch supervisor position was created. Then it took months to fill. It was filled. It was not a good fit for the staff and the person who was hired. So it was open again, and we were going to recruit, and then the pandemic happened, and then we were told to freeze. I just made my case with the city manager that we really need to get the branch supervisor position filled as we prepare to reopen, and he has given me the green light to recruit for it. One of the things that we realized that we didn't do a great job of the last time was to really define that position. And some of it was because we hadn't had a branch supervisor in a long time. So what we're doing as we describe, as we recruit this time, is we're working very, very hard on the announcement to make it very, very clear that this is a position that will be largely dedicated to outreach in the communities around those branches. And we've even gone so far as to talk about breaking it down by, a percentage. And right now, I expect that the branch supervisor, because the branch staff can pretty much run the branches, and the branch supervisor does need to be there to interface with public works to make sure things get fixed, to deal with administrative things, maybe deal with some emergencies. But largely, we want the branch staff, the branch supervisor to be someone who loves doing outreach and who knows going into the job that they should be expected to have the flexibility to spend and the desire to spend a considerable amount of their time outside the branches and out in the community in the van. And last time we didn't do a good job of making that clear. In some ways, we weren't totally clear. And I think we got someone who was a good person, but that was not so much their thing. So we're recruiting for that very clearly. Now that's a start, to get that branch supervisor who's dedicated to doing outreach. The next thing will be to use the information that we gather from doing homebound delivery, from doing some surveys, I'm sure, and to over the next several months, whenever City Council is ready, to be able to go back to them and to say, this is what we think this is what we know based upon what we've seen. We'll need to make to get Mateo out in the community more, to have more presentations at senior centers, and to basically be more of a library that transcends the walls. And to be honest with you, I do think we're going to need some dedicated staff, or at least some dedicated staffing hours. Because right now the motto is, and has been for so long, about having people present physically and at the desk, and then whatever we can spare or make room for, we send people out. But by the City Council making it a priority, we are looking at it like this is, in a way, a different division. It is dedicated to outreach. And the people who are going to be a part of this will know your focus is mainly outreach.
Makes a lot of sense.
Thanks.
James.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evening.
Oh, Rod, can we put you on hold for a sec? Don has his hand raised.
Oh, sorry.
No, thank you very much. You're next. Don.
Okay, I really had one thing, but as I listened to the conversation, I have three things to comment on. I'll try to be brief. Number one, I should let you know that I've been talking with people from the age-friendly group, and particularly about the possibility of intergenerational senior children programs in the future that might be tried. And I was asked to consider joining the committee, or wherever they call it. And I said, I could be interested in, so that might happen, and I should let you know that I I'm really interested in the possibility in everything that James talked about, but also the possibility that we take this really strong children's program that we have and connecting it with seniors in ways that are creative and I think could be both fun and good for the community. The second thing is just a tiny comment. I live in Bohannon House, and it has the discriminatory, you couldn't live here if you were black originally. So I'm attached to that history in a way I don't particularly like. And we just found it out relatively recently, looking at papers from that time. But I also wanted to just say, I think we make a mistake with our two neighborhood libraries. I think we would be far better off to have one person who's working there that's responsible for that library. I've had two recent experiences in neighborhood libraries, and they were the most indifferent, unfriendly, just really frustrating experience. As a person, I don't think having somebody that's responsible for two libraries is like having a principal that's responsible for two schools. It just doesn't work.
Okay. So, well, what I would say is this, we do get a lot of positive feedback on the service that the staff give at the branches as well. But when you get positive feedback, you also have to be willing to accept and listen to critique. And I'm sorry that you had an experience that you feel was indifferent. And I don't know what to say about that, except that we reiterate that perhaps my number one value is customer service. If you can't do anything right, at least you can treat people decently. And so I don't know exactly what happened there, but I'm always available offline to talk about it some more. As far as one person per branch, I would love to, one person running each branch, I would love to have it, but we don't have a budget for it. We can only hire one supervisor to oversee both branches. That is a far from ideal, situation, but we have to work within the limitations that we have. If anybody here could make it happen, where we could get another position, I would love that. But I also respect that our city manager, who I just think very highly of him. I think that I try to respect that he has to look at the big picture, and that we can't get everything that we want. But I am also willing to push and advocate too, because I know that, based on what people say, we know a lot goes to public safety. And we know that the conversation has been opened up as to whether or not some of those resources could be better used if they were put towards things like parks and libraries. And believe you me, I'm very open to that discussion. Regarding your Bohannon house, the Bohannons contribute to the library a great deal. And I read an article with David Bohannon where I thought that he really spoke very upfront and honestly about the situation. And the gist of it was, I'm not my grandfather. I didn't do it. I understand that we all have a responsibility now. I'm reading a book called The Color of Law, written by Richard Rothstein and he's the guy who wrote the New York Times article about the Bohannon situation in Hillsdale. And it's really a heartbreaking book. It's literally painful for me to read, because you see these patterns all across the United States. And one of the things he talks about was that, in a way, it's not necessarily even at that time, it was not necessarily up to a developer like David Bohannon, not letting him off the hook. But in a lot of ways, our federal government, as well as our state government, city councils, and city planners actively worked to give white Americans opportunities to buy homes, to give people like my dad, who has served in World War II, to prevent them from using the GI Bill to get on the property ladder. And that they did a lot of things that created ghettos and wealth inequities. And from my experience, what he's sharing holds up, as well as health inequities. We cannot go back and rewrite that history. And like you said, Don, you didn't even know about it. But it is imperative that we talk about it and we learn from it. And then we just say, you know what, we're not going to do that again. It's caused a lot of trouble. And now we got a chance to fix it. And if America is known for doing one thing very well, is learning from our mistakes. And hopefully we'll learn this time and take this opportunity to get better and address those issues.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well
Rod,
said.
I think you waited patiently. Sorry, Lisa. You're the
I was
MC.
just going to say, well said. So now over to Rod.
The only reason you can say I waited patiently, I had the sound off. You couldn't hear me. Well, thank you very much.
Energy.
Pardon me?
We see the energy in your body. You're going back and forth like you can't wait.
No, of course, that was, I'm sorry for butting in there, Don. Didn't see your hand up. Three things real quick. One was I kind of was going to mention something along the lines of what Don said in terms of the potential for an intergenerational approach. You know, we all know the statistics. You know, in 15, I think less than 15 years, I read more people over 65 than under 18 in the United States. So I think that speaks to that, this broadening the scope. That would be one thing. Number two, James, there are neighboring cities, specifically like Foster City, I know that is an certified, I guess is the right term, age-friendly city. And I'm just wondering about the opportunity to collaborate in some way with them, or something like that. And I know Vince is intimately involved in this, so he knows all about that kind of thing. I'm thinking about, you know, the libraries, but also I keep coming back to the walking and the path that has nothing to do with the library, but the path along the bay where our two cities meet. That would be something like that. And then in terms of funding opportunities, Lisa would know this. I mean, are there Measure S funds, I guess, could be applied or utilized in this way, I would think, can't they? I mean, is that, I don't even know how that, you know, how the things all breaks down, but I believe those funds can be applied to seniors and people like that. Is that a possibility?
Measure S funds are primarily for streets reconstruction. There's also some funding to restore 2 police positions and 1 librarian position that were cut during, not this past recession, but the one before. And every year there is a call out, the city manager calls out and says, are there any capital projects that any of the departments around the city have that would fall under the general Measure S rubric? And James has in the past presented the library redesign, expansion, a lot of the modernization projects, but don't know about whether any of these would actually qualify.
No, I thought it was a little broader, but you would know. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
All right.
Right, then let's move on, James.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I believe the next thing on the agenda was an update on our reopening. So as it stands, we are obviously doing lobby service and we are scheduled to reopen. We're scheduled to reopen at all 3 locations for browsing and computing services completely. We're not putting a limit on the number of people who can be in the building, but we are going to keep the hours of operation limited to the current curbside hours. We will be adding a Saturday at, we will be open on Saturday on Main. Sorry, I was getting ahead of myself. When we look ahead to further reopening, we are looking at adding the days to the branches. So what this means is a couple of days a week, people will be able to go into the branches on different days, use a computer, browse, select items. They can go into Main 6 days a week. And we're going to be open roughly 4 hours each day. We have removed a lot of seating. This is what a lot of libraries are doing, because on the May 3rd reopening, there is some seating. We basically have removed 3 out of 4 seats, 3 out of 4 seats at the computers. We really are, without making it a hard rule, we really are trying to encourage people to browse, to spend as much time as they need to select items. If they're on a computer, to use a computer, but not like before. We're not there yet to sit down and spend a long time there. Although there are seats there, and if you bring a laptop, you can use your laptop. As you all know, the governor threw a lot of us for a loop when he said that if things continue to go well, that June 15th, a lot of the state could be reopened. Our plan right now is to continue playing it by ear and be prepared to open either June 15th or shortly thereafter, maybe a couple of weeks after. From my position as city librarian, it's a mixed bag. The numbers are great so far. I just got my first vaccination shot today, but we also know there's a horrible crisis in India. We know that we have a border crisis here in the United States with a lot of people who may be vulnerable and have not been tested. We know there's a horrible crisis popping up in Brazil. We know there's Ontario is going back into shutdown in Canada. So we are going to continue our course as much as possible to not just throw the doors open, but I think gradually is not quite the word, but to very carefully go through this process. And with that said, we could, if things continue as they are, we could expect in mid to late June, maybe early July, that we will be completely open, if not with completely fully restored hours, close to fully restored hours. The last time I spoke with Lisa, she asked me the channels which we are communicating information about our hours. And we're using our e-newsletter, which is sent out later this week. We are using the library homepage, and we also have there a set of FAQs. We're using the city newsletter, and we're using social media to share with people. As far as where we sit on a scale of PLS libraries, San Mateo County Library pretty much open for browsing, but they did open up their whole buildings. They did that last week. Redwood City is open for browsing. We're opening next week. The others are getting open, and at least one of them is saying that they've been instructed to wait to see what everyone else is doing and how it goes before they reopen. Are there any questions about our reopening plan or schedule?
Liz.
This isn't really a question. Well, it is kind of a question. So you mentioned some of the ways we are electronically letting people know the hours.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to post actually a hard copy so people walking by the library can see?
I wish I could tell you 100% if that has been done, but I believe it has been done. But if it hasn't, then we can certainly do it. But I am pretty sure that it has been done, but that's something I would need to double check on.
I don't
make sure.
remember seeing it, but I
Okay.
can't say I went out of my way to look for it either.
Okay.
It can be right underneath James's hand in his life-size. Great. Liz, did you have any other questions? No. Okay, Lester, over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. James, first 2 questions. One, I'm trying to understand it. Basically, you just said like San Mateo's open for browsing, Rose City's opening for browsing next week, and we're opening for browsing shortly thereafter. But then that sounds different than the June 15th / July date. So what's the difference between those two dates?
Well, just let me clarify. We're not going to open for browse. We're opening. Oh, okay. So I hear what you're saying. So we're opening for browsing next week. But the June 15th date or shortly thereafter is more of a planned fuller reopening. So the difference would be right now, we're just open 4 hours a day. And that's what we're going to do when we open up the full building. We're going to keep the curbside hours. When June comes, we look towards opening somewhere close, if not all the way to our full hours. So it would be, yeah. So that would be like close to a full reopening, if not a full reopening.
So the difference is the hours open, not the types of activities that are allowed.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that could change because depending on where we are with vaccinations, depending on where we are with control of the pandemic, we could be at a place where we could say, yeah, where people can. There are more computers available. Well, that's another time where we expect to pretty much have restored computer hours. But we could say, yeah, we are encouraging people to sit more or to stay more. I think if we're going to open up fully, we're going to have to accept at that point that we are basically saying that people can stay. And we do have a few patrons that stay a long time.
Okay. Second question. Second question. So this is going to be a bit of a what if, since none of us can predict what the governor is going to do. But if indeed the governor or the state, like on June 15th, says like, okay, we've done away with the tiers, the state's reopened, what's the rationale or justification for delaying the library opening past that date?
That's a good question. I think for me, well, first of all, I would consult with our city manager, and he's going to give me a good idea of what the expectation is. And we talk a lot. And so, right now the last conversation was, this is coming, be prepared for expectations to raise as well as be prepared to open. So I think the only rationale that I could think of, and I think the city manager will have to be in agreement. And then we'd also have to check the temperature with the community. The only rationale that I could think of, and I just don't see how this would happen, is if for some reason maybe the local situation was looking worse than some other areas. But my view is, if the state has said that we can reopen and the county says that we can reopen, then we are going to follow those. We're going to pretty much go along with those rules. But there are other factors that I do have to weigh. Some of it is like staff concerns, fears. Some of it is feedback that we're getting from the community. If community is really chomping at the bit, or if they're saying, we could wait, we're not so comfortable yet. But in general, I think we're just going to follow the state and the county guideline. If they say at that time it's still looking like we can reopen and a good number of people are vaccinated, then I couldn't see us going against that.
Lester, did you have any other comment on that?
No questions, but I think I see Liz wants to ask a question, so I'll save my comment for after the questions.
Okay. All right, Liz, over to you.
Yeah, I was just curious. I've been a couple of times to pick up whole books, and I thought it went very smoothly to go inside. And I was just wondering, have there been any issues at all with people coming in since we opened for that?
There have been a couple. So one has been a young man who was like a teenager who we honestly think just didn't, he walked past the barriers and went upstairs, and for whatever reason, it didn't register with him that the barriers were there to prevent people, but he cooperated, and his his grandparent or someone was downstairs picking up something, and that went very smoothly. We've had an incident with one particular patron that we have to talk to, who uses the computers and who has been told repeatedly to keep his mask on. And so we may have to, in that particular situation, ask that individual to leave the next time, but it has happened several times. And then today, there was one incident where there was a person last week who was upset because the scanner wasn't available, and they thought that we should be fully open. And then today we had an incident with one of our regular patrons who probably spends 5-6 hours a day at the library, and on average, and talks to our staff a lot. And nice person, doesn't always, judge when is a good time for that, but he got pretty upset today. He thought we should just be open. And to be frank with you, the library is very much his lifeline, his social lifeline. He spends much of his days there. And so for the last year or so, he hasn't had it. But we know him well, and he's someone that we could talk to, and we could say, next week, next Monday, you can come in for a few hours each day. And after that, in a month or two, month and a half or two, we could look forward to expanding back to full hours, if not, or close to full hours, depending on how things look. And he calmed down and he accepted that. So I would say we've had about 4 people since we've done this who've either misread the instructions or who are frankly disappointed or frustrated that we're not open more or fully right now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's not too bad.
Not too bad.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions before we open it up for comments? No, then
I have a quick
question.
Yeah, quick. James, this is more, I'm just wondering, how is it determined, or how much do you guys, the librarians in each of the different main city libraries, kind of work together? This is kind of a back, it's not specific. The reason I ask is, it seems like, as you said, a lot of the cities around us, they're open in a limited way, such as you're saying, and they all have kind of this, all of you guys kind of have the same hours.
Yeah.
And then Burlingame is the one that still is closed, if I kind of read stuff correctly. So it's just more from my understanding.
Sure.
You guys talk and say, yeah, let's do 10 to 2, 2 to 6, or let's fit, or how's that work? And if you don't want to take the time now, that's fine.
So here's how it works. I can explain it pretty quickly. The libraries in Daly City, South San Francisco, San Bruno, San Mateo County, which encompasses places like Los Gatos or Los Altos, basically some spread out libraries. Burlingame, I think I already said. We are part of the Pacific Library System. The Pacific Library System is a consortium of about 8, 9 libraries, of libraries I just named. We're all independent. We all represent our cities, or the county represents the county. However, we share costs on things like our databases, or some of our databases, our circulation systems, the security gates at the door, the delivery, so that since we're relatively small libraries, so that our patrons can have access to more collections. So if you're a San Bruno resident, you can borrow something from us, or Daly City, etc. We directors get together since the pandemic has begun bi-weekly, and we all talk about where we are, what we're going through, how's it going with reopening, what are the challenges you're facing, how far have you gotten on your plan? Can you share your plan? Can you help me develop this plan? So I talk with the other directors on a bi-weekly basis, and we all share our plans. For the most part, they are independent, but a good part of sharing those plans is understanding how other people's plans will impact our library. And it can be confusing for patrons. They often confuse us with San Mateo County Library. But this is a consortium that's been around since the late 70s, I believe. And it's basically a resource sharing consortium. And when you go to sign up for a library, library card, when you give us your zip code, if your zip code says San Bruno, you will be a San Bruno library card holder, but you can borrow stuff from other libraries. But there'll be certain things at San Mateo that you can't use, like you couldn't use our Chromebooks. But you would have to go to San Bruno and use theirs because that is specifically designated for San Mateo community members. So it's resource sharing with the exclusion of some specific resources that are probably funded by the foundation or something that are targeted for community members. And we meet bi-weekly.
So shared ideas and things like that, but with autonomy at the ultimate, at the end, you still have the autonomy. Thank you.
Yes, and it's not ideal, but it is it's longstanding and it's worked pretty well over the years.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Lester, I think you've got a comment now.
I do, but I noticed that we have an attendee, so I don't know if you want to check for public comment.
Dina? We have someone.
We do have an attendee. They have not indicated they want to speak. It looks like it's actually an employee.
Oh, okay.
I see it.
Okay, great. Well then, thank you very much I will open the public comment. Any requests for public comment? And I don't hear any, so I will close public comment and bring it back in. And Lester, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. James, I think I would say, I think you could do more to, quote, show your work, end quote, as it were, like with regards to the decision making.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not always obvious, like, you know, why only limited hours or limited activities, or, you know, like you talked about consulting with the city manager. Like, so to the extent that, like, after these consultations and decisions, I would like strongly encourage you to share more of the work in terms of explaining to the public, like, you know, what's the holdup, right? You know, especially if the state does indeed, I think in extreme situation, if the state does open everything and you choose to delay beyond that, that's really a situation where there needs to be showing the work of, like, what is the rationale, right? Like, I know it can be complicated, right? Like, but I'll say I always felt like staff concerns is like, it's kind of vague and fuzzy and it's hard to explain to others. Like, some, I mean, obviously there may be some confidential details. I'm not asking for any of that, but just like, these are the kinds of dimensions, or these are the factors, like, and which ones were weighted, right? But like something that's, and, you know, being proactive about, like, putting on the website, like, this is the decision right now, right? Like, I think just it's important to show your work in this, you know, in this era of, like, confusion about, like, you know, it's so hard to keep track of, like, what's going on and why. The why can help people understand the what.
Okay, I think your point is well taken, and you are representative of the community interest. So, you know, there have been a couple of times, like, I know, you know, the May 3rd reopening where I talked about it with the deputy city librarian as to whether or not I should make a statement. I declined just because I just didn't think it was necessary. But I think based off of what you said, I think it's worth reconsidering, and it's not a problem for me to make a statement. It requires a lot of thought and careful wording because, you know, it may be difficult to explain to someone that, you know, there may be staff who are still nervous about close interactions with the public. And that although technically I may be able to say this is just what we have to do, that's not a good way to lead. You want to, as much as possible, negotiate between what we have to do and between taking the steps to build comfort level with your staff. There are also other things that are a bit technical. You know, a number of us libraries have laid people off during the pandemic or have had people who've chosen to be off for their safety, for their health, because they're in a vulnerable group. And it takes time to bring those people back and reincorporate them back into the schedule. And so it's difficult to talk about that honestly without straddling a line of giving too much detail. So I kind of have to be a little vague, but I do agree that there are times where simply making a statement and being as honest as possible will make a difference. You know, that said, I can't foresee why we would delay. Just because the state opens on June 15th doesn't mean that just because the governor says that we can open on June 15th does not mean that every library is going to. That's sort of a demarcation to say, well, we think the coast is clear. I think that we'll be one of the better prepared libraries, but I imagine there are going to be a number of libraries that open up gradually around that time or shortly thereafter, or maybe even over the weeks or months after. But I agree with you. I can make a statement. I will make a statement. I may make it at the end of this week. I may ask for it to be published in our next email, or I may save it for because I think I may have missed our monthly newsletter, but I could save it for the May newsletter and share what we have. But yeah, I don't expect for us to stay closed long after if the governor goes on to say we can open. It would just be a matter of logistics and just saying, do we have the people in place? Do we need a little more time for that? Do we have everything set up? Do we need a little more, things like that?
Yeah, and I think just a distinction. I'm saying show the work, make it public. It doesn't have to be like highly publicized, right? Like I'm not suggesting like let's do some like newsletter based campaign, but at least it's transparent and visible if people are like, well, what's going on, right? So I'm not saying it doesn't take.
We could put it on the website.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it doesn't take a lot of work to carefully phrase it, as you said, right? But at least I would say my suggestion does not include the publicity effort, right? So there's just making it public, not necessarily publicizing it, if that distinction makes sense.
It does make sense.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that suggestion.
Good.
I'm all done. Over to you, Rod.
Well, that's an interesting distinction, Dr. Chen. Mike, real quick, James, why is Burlingame not opening? Just a couple reasons. They're the only one. I didn't do an exhaustive research, but in this area, to be the only one. Why?
Well, this is a public meeting. I can just tell you what I know. I can tell you what I think is reasonable to share in group, from group meetings with other library directors. My belief is that there are different degrees of risk tolerance.
Okay.
And I think on the spectrum, I think there's a spectrum. There are some cities that say, based upon their leadership or the library's leadership, we are willing to take this risk now and forge ahead. And there are others who say, you know what, we are still not totally comfortable with this. Let's see what others are doing and see how it goes. And honestly, you can find reason to support either of those approaches.
Yeah, and you mentioned maybe they're sensitive to their employees being a little more cautious. I'm just curious. They're the only one from what I saw, so I was just curious. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Are there any other comments? And I guess the only thing I would add, James, with the reopening, it's such a wonderful opportunity to share stories about, how people then are reconnecting to the library and how it is, like this gentleman, it's his lifeline, or other things, just to really reinforce what a great public community service the library is. And that's sort of an open-ended, as you get the stories, as it's appropriate. I think it would be wonderful and make people feel good about we're coming together again and really feel good about the library.
Thank you. We have some very creative people, far more creative than me. And I imagine that some of them are thinking about these things right now, as far as ways in which we can celebrate a reopening and ways in which we could market,
Mhm.
as a significant date. So storytelling seems to be a theme right now, and
Yep.
stories are important. We know it.
Yeah. And just it's such a community. So that's
Absolutely.
okay. Well, then why don't we move on to the next item, James, which is over to you again, about how do we handle short-term changes to library services and operations.
Yes. So this is a little complex, and I'm going to try not to complicate it more, but I do think some background context is needed. So, when the pandemic began, we quickly shifted some things, and I know certain things came up, like, for example, I'm trying to remember the meeting that we had very quickly to make an adjustment to, I think it was to extend the checkout time for things, to change the policy. And then when after months of having people hold their items, we decided that the date that we had announced that they were due was going to be a soft date, and that we were actually going to give people another week, because we knew that some people were going to be confused. And then we made a change. Then Kathy told us about the Chromebook Cafe. We decided to roll that out real quick as a pilot. And there wasn't much conversation at all with the Board of Trustees. I just shared that we were going to do the pilot. And then most recently, when we were opening again, we decided, because of the limited number of computers that were going to be available, to allow just 1 hour reservations, with the notion that we could allow more people to use the computers, but they got less time. In connection with these, Trustee Chin expressed that he was concerned because, all these things are not normal policy, and they were things that we were doing, and he wanted us to talk about it, and he wanted some clarification. And that was at the last meeting. So after that meeting, my initial thought was to think of ways. I'm going to be honest. My initial thought was, it's very, very difficult to maneuver through a pandemic, and to also go through the process of policy changing and updating when things have to happen very quickly. And there's just no other way. So I thought about it, and I really respected his thought, because his concerns were about, I think, well, what's the point of policy if they can just be changed, like that? So my initial thought was to think about maybe time limits where we could make temporary changes, time limits for how long we could run a pilot. As I mentioned, each week we talk about bi-weekly, we talk about our reopening process amongst the PLS directors, and we share our challenges. And one of the things I shared was to ask how my peers were handling this. And the thing that came up was that people told me that I should check with the city manager, because they said the city manager has emergency powers during a pandemic, and that was how they were doing things. So when I met for my weekly one-on-one with Drew Corbett, he said, yes, he said that is true. And he said that for the last 14 months, the city has been operating under a state of emergency issued by the state and the county. And that in those situations, the city council grants, the city municipal code grants him the power to make emergency adjustments, which he works out with the department heads. And that each city council meeting, so each week when we talk, I discuss with him the things that we're doing, what our next steps are going to be, etc. He obviously has a chance to ask questions, to veto, or he hardly ever vetoes, but he may say, well, you should think about this before you do that. And we're usually able to reach an agreement. When he does that, then he goes to the next city council meeting, which have been weekly or bi-weekly during the pandemic, and he shares what each department is doing as far as adjustments to navigate the pandemic. And at that point, if I understand him correctly, the city council has the opportunity to, and I attend those meetings, the city council has the opportunity to ask questions or even to decline something. In each case, they have either asked no questions or asked questions and said, fine, go ahead. So in short, during emergency periods, like the one we've been in for the last 14 months, to clarify, we don't have to change policies to make changes in our operations. And we don't have to get approval from the Board of Trustees, the Library Board of Trustees, to do that. The city manager, in the case of an emergency, is the authority. And during that time, he makes emergency decisions working with the department heads. So that was why, and he shared the municipal code with me. So that was why I shared the municipal code, and that's the clarification I wanted to provide. Now, Trustee Chin can weigh in because I do think that was his principal concern. We don't make temporary changes. I've never heard of a library making temporary changes to the way they operate and do policy in a non-emergency. It would have helped if I clarified this in the beginning, but I didn't know. I was just scrambling like everyone else, and some of my more experienced peers did know. So we don't make temporary changes during regular times. We do occasionally try a pilot, but the only pilot that I can think of that we've tried since I've been there that wasn't, that wasn't well thought, that wasn't long thought out and considered and presented to the trustees for your feedback, because we don't ask permission to do pilots. We can't operate that way. The only pilot that we did in a rather hasty fashion was recommended by a board of trustee, and it was during the pandemic. So to summarize, during emergency situations like we've been in the last 6 months, the adjustments that we make to our operations are not policy issues. They are emergency adjustments to keep us open and to keep us functioning. And the city manager works with me, a department head, to make those decisions, which he ultimately signs off on and approves, and then presents to the city council, which they ultimately sign off on and approve. So if there are any questions, let me know. I think primarily it was Trustee Chin who was seeking the clarification and had some concerns and thoughts and maybe wanted a further discussion about whether or not there should be some action to adjust the way policies are done in these instances. I'm open for questions, and the floor is yours.
Question.
If you want to discuss it.
Anyone?
Well, Librarian Moore, I think you should feel free to call me Lester.
Okay.
We don't have to be so formal, but if that's the new thing the city
right,
clerk wants us to do, I'm happy to do it. No, I mean, I think this is, thank you for doing the research on the municipal code. I think it's philosophically, it's kind of aligned with like what I would have come up with, like clean sheet, right? Like in a declared state of emergency, the city manager makes emergency decisions, which makes sense. And then like at the next city council meeting, the city council basically like reviews and edits if they want to, right? And so that's fine. So I think for all the emergency changes, that's it, I understand now the mechanism in which it works, right? It's kind of like this umbrella of the city manager things.
And I may add something quickly, which is that the Library Board of Trustees definitely are able to communicate directly with city council members. If you want to express, a view or a need for something, that is the part of the relationship. You're able to represent community interests to city council members and keep them informed, for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
So my question is, so that covers like a global state, city, or citywide emergency. But would you think there's a benefit to a similar mechanism if it is library specific? For example, hypothetically, let's say there was a fire at Maine, which only
Mhm.
affects the library and is not a citywide emergency,
Mhm.
right? Like, I don't imagine like this becomes like something Drew would, or sorry, the city manager would get involved in. So would you want a equivalent mechanism for library specific emergencies?
Actually, I think it would be covered with Drew. I think that, you know, it would not be, you know, like you said, across departments, but I think it would be something where I would discuss it with the city manager. But I know from experience, rather than to say what I think, I would rather go back and clarify. From my standpoint, just to be frank with you,
I
yeah,
see.
if there was a
So,
fire at the library and we needed to make adjustments in our operations to accommodate that, or tell people, you know, you don't have to bring your items back. We're not going to fine you because there was a fire and you can't come in the building. I would rather be able to work with Drew. I would not want to have to wait to have a discussion and a vote with the trustees in a situation like that. I would want to have the flexibility to make adjustments so that we could provide the best customer service things possible related to the incident.
doesn't the Drew mechanism, the city manager mechanism require a declaration of state of emergency?
That is my understanding.
Okay, so you would like go to Drew and ask him to declare a emergency. So in this scenario, you would just, okay. fair
No,
enough.
what I'm saying is I don't know because I've never been in charge of a library when there was a fire. So if that is a specific question, I would prefer to go back and communicate with the city manager's office and get you a firm answer on that. I don't know if a fire at the library would be declared a state of emergency, if that's
Okay,
your question.
fair enough. Yeah, okay, got it.
Do you want me to get that answer?
I think so, because I think like I want you to have all the tools you need, James.
Okay.
Right. And if it's like, and if the answer is like, yep, Drew would declare an emergency and then we can use the existing municipal gold mechanism, then, you know, done and dusted from my perspective.
Okay.
If it's like, no, James, like, that wouldn't be a citywide emergency.
Okay.
Then it seems like you would want a emergency mechanism that doesn't yet exist, and that it would be helpful to create one.
Okay.
But you know, it's probably better to ask Drew for 5 minutes rather than spend like, you know, 50 minutes figuring this out if the answer is easier.
Yeah, and I meet with him Wednesday, so I can find out pretty quickly.
Okay. Bye.
Great. Thank you. Liz,
Thank
do you
you.
have a question?
Yeah, I just think this is a really interesting conversation, and I appreciate Lester, your insights on things, because sometimes I think you come at things from such a different place than I do. And so I think this is really interesting. I have, when I first became a trustee over 6 years ago, there was a really clear distinction that we were not to get overly involved in operational matters, personnel, staffing, that kind of thing, budget that's not from the foundation or donations. It was pretty clear. And then I think over the years, we've been working on a lot of policies, some new that never existed. But I always felt like that was to aid you in your job. And so it's interesting now hearing this conversation. I mean, I don't think any of us want to hamstring you, make your job harder.
Sure.
And so I'm wondering, have some of these policies that were supposed to help you now made your job more difficult? And I don't think any of us intended to do that.
Sure.
I mean, this question of if there's a fire at the library, how is that not an emergency where James should be able to do whatever he needs? You know, it's interesting, but I do understand that, yeah, we have rules about returns and things, but it's interesting. It's just a different way of looking at it, what we need to do. And I think the bigger question is when we pick policies to write, you know, why are we doing the policies, and does it make sense, depending on the topic, to be getting in the weeds on some of these things that may be making your life harder. I mean, right?
So, James, can I jump in?
Yeah,
Because I
sure.
think I want to explain my position.
Yeah.
Like I'm not approaching this from like, I'm trying to make James' life harder. And it's sort of not specific to James. It's just kind of, I guess, more from a first principles basis of, well, I guess as James put it pretty eloquently, like, if policies can be changed unilaterally, like what's the point of doing them, right?
Mhm.
So, and like, so I'm going to, just to be a bit provocative and evocative, I'm going to create an example. Like, let's suppose a future librarian says, you know what, dress codes are the way to go. And I'm going to put in a dress code. And I'm going to start kicking people out if they don't conform to a dress code. And, like, so that's why I feel like it's important. Like, look, like we're saying the policies on patrons' behavior, like a future librarian can't unilaterally like just blow through them, right? So there has to be a mechanism, in the same way the city council set up its mechanism of like, look, like future city managers, you current and future city managers, you need a mechanism to respond quickly. That's fine, but it's not unlimited. And then they do go back to city council for just like that, oversight, right? So it's kind of this first principle where I'm coming from of like, yes, let's make it flexible, but like, and reasonable, but there is some line where like there is a, I guess, check and balance, for lack of a better word.
Well, I would say this. I appreciate both of your points of views. Thank you, Liz, because I do think, I do think this conversation, causes me to think about, what the point is for policies, what the point is for having a board of public representatives to help with those policies. I do think it is in general to help us function well and operate well, and to a certain degree that depends on the trust of having hired a good city librarian and having good staff there. That said, it is also important that, like Lester said, we don't have carte blanche, and it's very unlikely that a librarian would take over and decide to, usher in some arbitrary rules. So a part of me says, well, that's never happened and is not likely. So whether or not you want to protect against that, I mean, that's debatable. But what I will say is this. I think there are some library directors who get sensitive about their authority. And we do need a certain degree of authority to do our job well. It's just necessary. But I'm not sensitive about that. I will state where I need the authority to do certain things and how the board can support me and help me with that. But I also will state that, the process of Lester asking this question forced me to figure out exactly what the rule is on this. And I didn't know, and because I hadn't gone through this. And it helps me to understand why when you talk to a library director who's been doing it for 10 years, they just know, because they've probably gone through this process. And so for me, within reason, and I think Lester has been reasonable, I think these questions, ultimately, if I can't answer them quickly, it means it's something that I need to learn. And ultimately, they have served to educate me so that the next time we have an emergency, I'll just know this is what we do. We don't have to have a policy vote, but I'll also know, let me make sure that the board knows this is why we're doing this. And this is to give you all, it's just a matter of respect and idea of how long we expect something to last, if it's going to be short term.
That was a good discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other questions before I open it up to public comment? Okay, then I'll open it up to public comment. Any public comment? None, then I will close it back. Any final comments from anyone on the board or the foundation before we move on? Okay. And I think, James, we can consider that a good discussion and closed. So we have one final bit of new business from you on sharing how library staff determines the need for assistance from the San Mateo Police Department in handling
Absolutely.
patron issues.
So I know this is a very relevant topic these days. I know shortly after the tragic, horrible incident in Minnesota last year that, I actually read about the Boston Public Library talking about no longer calling the police to assist with issues. And frankly, as an African-American male who's basically dealt with police discrimination much of his life, and been in some thorny situations for someone who's never even had a speeding ticket. One of the areas in which I have seen police departments, especially our police department here in San Mateo, with whom, by the way, I've never had any issues. They've always been respectful. One of the areas in which I have seen the value of police and seeing them really behave in a way that is good and well representative and respectful has been working at public libraries. So I want to give you a rundown of how the decision is made when we call SMPD. After verifying through observation or reports from other staff or patrons that someone is breaking a rule of conduct, a frontline staff typically will politely clarify our rules and the reason for them. If necessary, they'll hand the person a copy of the rules, and they will just politely ask them to please stop. That's the first warning. Second warning, if the person continues, the staff will ask them again and explain that they need to cease it or they run the risk of potentially being asked to leave for the day. If the patron continues the third time, staff are instructed to contact the manager, myself, or a person in charge, whoever is first available. A person in charge is at a time when we don't have a manager in the building, which is rare, but that happens sometimes. And there'll be a designated person in charge, usually a librarian. The person in charge will then politely approach, and we are always polite, or at least we try to be most of the time. I know, Don, unfortunately, you said you have had less than satisfactory experience recently. But the person in charge is expected to politely approach the patron and explain that unfortunately they have reached a point where if the activity they're doing continues, it is causing a real problem. And then in order for them to continue using the library, and I always emphasize this with staff, to tell the person we are doing this because we want them to be able to stay. And we are going to explain to them why they are at risk of being asked to leave. So if they continue with it, then if they want to stay in the library, they must follow our reasonable rules. And we, once again, try to explain why we have them. If they are unable to follow the rules, we will sometimes invite them to leave and come back shortly. In most cases, if it's a patron that we know someone who has, I believe, maybe Tourette's, he'll leave and he'll come back after he's gathered himself. But if the person does not stop doing what they're doing, we at that point ask them to leave. And then we say, depending on how bad it is, either you can come back later once you've gathered yourself or ready to follow our rules, or come back tomorrow. Typically it's tomorrow. The manager, if they refuse, then we inform them that at this point, we're going to call law enforcement to assist us with the matter. We are typically called non-emergency unless the person is being highly disruptive or threatening to staff. We are very careful to provide context. We've learned from experience, as we all know, it's important to be clear before the police come, to not put them in a threat zone if that is unnecessary. Often the person will not leave, and they'll just sit there, and we can tell the cops, you know, this person's not being threatening or anything, but they won't leave, and we do need them to leave out of respect for our rules and the other patrons. Some large city libraries have unarmed security on site that they will call. Typically when we call SMPD, I would say in my time here, it's maybe happened 4 times a year, maybe quarterly. The overwhelming majority of cases, and here as well as at other libraries, they are related to some interaction of mental illness, substance abuse, or homelessness issues. And these things can sometimes lead people who are typically well-mannered and very respectful to become volatile if they are frustrated and unable to handle a situation. In most cases in San Mateo, and I want you all to know this is one of the reasons why I chose to work here, I felt that it was a place that I could know all the staff, as well as the size of the city meant that a lot of the community members can know each other. San Mateo officers will often arrive already acquainted with the person. They have 2 dedicated officers stationed downtown who focus on addressing issues related to homelessness. In these situations, I've seen the officers actually take the person, even in one instance where the person was being volatile, because in my experience, with all but the rarest of situations, even if someone is dealing with a mental illness fit, they typically can be corralled and led out of the building. And they typically may be very vocal or loud, but in my experience, I've not ever seen them attack someone, although sadly that has occurred. And in Sacramento, a librarian was shot. But typically our police know these people, they know their issues, they have some historical background, and they come prepared to firmly, but very kindly and respectfully get them to leave the building, talk to them, see if they can offer services. And I've seen this each time we've had to call them. I've never seen them have to get physical with anyone. I've never seen them be abusive with anyone. And like I said, I've seen the police officers in places like Portland or Seattle call drug assistance, call alcohol assistance, and get them out. So in my experience, this is an area where consistently, whether it was Portland, Seattle, Berkeley, or here, especially here, the San Mateo Police Department have consistently shown professionalism, restraint, patience, and compassion. And in most instances, is a person who is dealing with some issues, who has become very frustrated, and they need to leave for the day and gather themselves. We did have one instance where a man was being threatening to staff, and it had nothing to do with homelessness or anything like that. He was being bigoted, and he was making statements to staff. And in that instance, it was necessary for the police to be firm. But to be honest with you, he would not listen to anything we asked. He was threatening to any of us who talked to him. And it was absolutely necessary, because when the police came, he behaved. He gathered his stuff and he left. And we told him, you can come back if you follow our rules. And obviously he wasn't prepared to do that, because I haven't seen him since. But the type of abuse that he was heaping on a couple of our staff persons made it very clear that he was not going to leave unless there was some authority that was going to make him leave. And when they came, he did. So that is a short overview of the instances in which we call SMPD. And I welcome your questions or thoughts about how that works, what it means for libraries, what it means for law enforcement, what it means for our patrons.
Are there any questions about James's remarks?
James, accepting the case where the person of the bigoted individual,
Mm-hmm.
what has been the how have the other folks reacted when the police show up?
Well, you know, that's a good one. And actually, we dealt with other individuals. I actually had a woman call me nigger multiple times, and I was very patient with her. And this was at San Mateo. The police officers knew her. They knew her because she is homeless. And actually, we were actually able to work something out because I was going to put her out for a good long time for using that language, and she upset a lot of people. After I talked to her, I realized there was no excuse for what she did, but it was going to hurt her a lot more than I wanted to keep her out. And we ended up talking, and we ended up establishing a relationship. And she was volatile. Typically, so to answer your question, typically, so we've had an instance where I'm trying to think of the times, because when I was at Berkeley, I would say, you know, they had on-site security, and even at the branches, we probably called the police once a month. Here it's not frequent. So we had an instance where a fellow used our computers, and I believe he was homeless, and he would break stuff, the Chromebooks, etc. And our staff is taught to do whatever they can to accommodate the person. And he broke something. So this time they said, you know, you broke something, you have to pay us $10. And he said, you always accuse me of that, but it was true. But they were going to work out with him a way to pay. They were going to say, hey, we'll give you something. But because he had very weak, he had challenges with impulse control, he slapped all the stuff off the desk, which hit a woman on our staff and cut her face. He then went upstairs and pulled a computer off the desk and destroyed that computer. So in that case, we had to call 911. One of our staff persons were injured. The police came and he was gone. And what they said was because he didn't intend to hurt this person. We took it very seriously, but because he didn't intend to hurt this person, that was not assault. He came back later, very contrite, very asking for forgiveness. And I did suspend him for 3 months. And it would have been longer had he not come back and said, I know what I did was wrong, and I didn't mean to hurt that lady. But the police were like, we think we have an idea who it is. They went looking through the community, and they didn't find him. But it wasn't like, oh, we're going to find him and teach him a lesson. It was like, we need to find him and cite him. And if we're going to hold him accountable for the damage, which there was no way he could pay, we need to find him. And we think we know who he is, and we'll find him eventually. And then we'll get back to you. There was another instance where last year, where a year before, where there was a fellow who threatened one of our female librarians, and once again, mental issue. And he threatened to, it was racial in his own way. He was African American, she was white, and he had a problem with her telling him what to do. And so I said, let me talk to him, thinking that if I calmly approached him and showed him respect and humanity, and as soon as I began saying, sir, I would like for you to stop and I don't want you to leave, he basically said he would kill me. And he said not to talk to him and he would stab me and this and that. So I said, at this point, just let him sit down in the aisle and leave him alone. We called the police. They came, they knew who he was. When he saw us calling the police, he started moving towards the door anyway. And he yelled stuff. And then when they came, they were like, we know who he is. He grew up here. He's been in and out. And we're just going to get him out of the building. And if you want to trespass him, we can do that. But if you want to get a restraining order, you will need to go to court. So in that instance, they removed him. He came back the next day. We got another trespassing. Then I just happened to be walking through the community one Saturday morning, and the guy jumps out of nowhere and says he wants to fight me. And he follows me down the street, challenging me to a fight. And, I stopped and basically said, well, I'm here, I'm not running. What do you, so what's the problem? At that point, I knew he didn't want to fight me. This is just how he handled things. I turned and walked away. He followed me for a while, called me cowards, and then he disappeared. At that point, I decided that we needed to get a restraining order. We went to court, we got the restraining order, and he's not allowed to come into the library for 3 years. Weird thing about it is I saw him recently and I said, you know what? I just don't have patience for this guy. You know, if he starts something with me, I'm not taking it. Just to go show you how these things go, he said, hey, how you doing? You work at the library. How are things up there? So we actually chatted for a moment, and I surmised that it was mental health. So in those instances, the police generally know this is a person that is not likely to do something. We come prepared if we need to, but we don't just jump out and start wailing on them or threatening them or saying, you know, what they'll do. They typically come and say 2 or 3 officers, maybe 4 if they need it, and they corral the person. They say, you need to move out. They get them moved out, and they typically will talk to the person outside, get information, find out if the person needs housing or something, and see if they can use any of their channels to get the person housing. And because of the size of San Mateo, we have a handful of homeless people that you see pretty regularly when you're downtown. And to their credit, we actually had a training. We had one of the officers come and do a training with us. The downtown public safety officer, which is the reason why I let the woman who called me nigger back in, because she said, I know her, she has a bunch of issues, she's actually not a bad person. I said, well, if she apologized to me, I'd be willing to give her another chance. And she knew her. And she said, yeah, I know her. We can have you guys sit down and talk. So because of police officers here in this relatively small city, not too big, not too small, they typically know the people. They know that people are what people expect. And I've never seen them. If anything, they've been like, you know, we know you would like them to leave sooner, but you know, we're trying to see what we can do to see if we can help them, you know, maybe get some housing or something like that. But yeah, we've had instances where people have threatened, instances where people have caused physical harm to staff inadvertently. But it's usually threats, and they're usually verbal, and they usually go away. But there was an incident in Sacramento where a fellow was asked to leave by a librarian, and this happened 2 years ago. And he came back and shot the woman in her car when she was leaving work. I've actually had a man in Portland, a white man, tell me that I was a dead nigger and that he was going to get me after work. And his reason for that was that he had been sexually harassing me, and I asked him not to. And my staff called the police, and then he decided that I was a dead nigger and he would kill me. And when someone says that to you, you're pretty much afraid, but you have to keep going to work because most people don't get mad and say they're going to kill you. In that instance, the library decided to move me to another branch for a month just to let things blow over. And I actually felt sorry for this guy because I saw him sleeping in his car and he couldn't control himself. And he got himself thrown out of the library and he threatened to kill me. So people don't understand often how complex and challenging it can be when you work in a public space where every single person is welcome and 99.9% of the people behave themselves, but you have some people who want to behave themselves, but they're really struggling with life.
James, that was just so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. I know that's not a question, but it's a heartfelt response.
Sure. You know, it's important for me, Lisa, to, it's important for me when it comes to our police officers, this is very important for me. It's important for me to critique them, to hold them accountable, to address injustices. Well, it's very important for them to get credit. It's very important to note that I've seen police officers come, ask me for a broom when a homeless person has trashed the front of our building in Berkeley, and the officer gets them a shelter and help, and then cleans up the whole front of our library. It's important to note that those things happen too.
Thank you.
You're
Liz,
welcome.
Yeah, James, I really appreciate all the stories. And, I always, in the back of my mind, think about, these things happen probably more often than we know. And I wonder what you think about, you say maybe 4 times a year there's an issue. As we start to reopen, I'd be curious if we start to track these calls, maybe like in our statistical report, just to see, because if there's any red flags, like if all of a sudden one branch starts to have weekly calls, just some indicator, because I feel like almost like we're remiss that we haven't followed this particular issue more closely over the years.
Well, let me add this. We keep a incident log that is ongoing. It's years old. And it's searchable. It's not a log, it's a database. So if we have a repeat person, we know who they are. And I have to tell you something, librarians and library staff are experts on psychology and humanely handling. You can't do the job very long without becoming that way. A lot of things that used to scare me do not scare me anymore, because you see patterns. You can almost tell when someone is dealing with a panic attack, or if they're not a dangerous person, but sometimes they break out in using profanity because maybe they have Tourette's. And you start to say, in your gut, you don't want to lull yourself into a false sense of safety, but you start to say, I've seen this before, this person is not going to hurt me. If I remain calm, and if I just tell them, hey, we're trying to help you, you need to leave. If you come back in an hour, just catch your breath, we'll let you back. That works 99% of the time. So if you want to add something like that, we can. I would want to restrict it just to when police were called, because most of the time it's just either people who do stuff that kind of push up to the edge, but they never reach that point where you say you got to leave. But it's just like, we need to track it in case it goes further. Right. Or it's people that we know, and we just are saying, hey, so-and-so had a meltdown today, just beware, he's having a hard time, and it actually works really quite well. Those people there are remarkably patient, humane, intelligent, and skillful at handling these situations. And the last thing they want to do is call the police.
Right. Yeah, I think that's why when AR called, that's worth knowing, I think. Because it's rare and it's that significant.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I would be interested to know. Yeah. Not the details, not the details, just sort of that it's happening.
I'll add this.
That's just my opinion. I don't know what the rest of you guys think.
Lester, over to you.
Thanks. I mean, first, let me just echo Liz's comment. James, thanks for sharing these frontline stories. I think this is that 0.1% of the time that most of us are blissfully unaware of, and it is uplifting to hear the stories of the library staff of Grace Under Pressure, and as well as the positive stories about like how our officers are doing community policing. So I think I have a technical question, like a very specific question, and a kind of an open-ended question for you. So the specific one is, of these times, like what percentage of the time does this lead to an arrest? Like
practically never. And I think that like, even when the guy threatened my life, the police didn't tell me this in Portland. They said just because he said he would kill you, that's not a crime. But what they didn't tell me was,
Okay, good to
what they
know.
didn't tell me was what the police in San Mateo told me when this guy threatened to kill me and other staff, was you can get a restraining order, but you have to go to court. So I had to work with the city attorney. But most of the time, I've not seen, there was one guy in Berkeley who got arrested, and I learned a lot from him because I mishandled him. I was confrontational with him. I didn't know who he was. And I said, if you don't follow our rules, you have to get out. And I didn't take into account his mental issues. So the police arrested him, and they, cause he went berserk. They arrested him, and they typically let him out. He came back, and I realized he wants to be here. I need to work with the mental health people, and they taught me some real skills on how to not set someone off. And he was able to use the library. And I take the blame because I just said, follow our rules or you got to go. And that was not the right approach.
Okay, so it's good to know that this, I think, you know, that in the national conversation about policing, right, like just too many arrests for people for mental health, which doesn't really help them. So it's good to know that generally this isn't happening here. My final and more open-ended question is, you know, now that we have additional resources in the form, now that the city has additional resources in the form of this, I still don't know what the position is called, right? But this non-police community, Lisa, do you know what this person?
Yeah.
Person's?
It's a mental health community outreach partner.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Thank you. Mental health. Like, James, what do you see as the pros and cons of making that person the first point of call in these situations? You know, based on your past experience, you know, had this person been available, what have been the pros and cons of calling them instead of the police?
I actually have experience. There are some instances, and I think this is probably true in most instances. You want the police to accompany them. There are people who don't mean to hurt people, but in my experience, they can lose control and do something they regret. This model worked very well in Berkeley. In fact, like I said, they taught me so much that decreased the conflict between some of our mentally ill patrons and allowed us to deal with them in a way where we didn't as frequently have to ask them to leave. There's also training such as mental health first aid, which is something that I was trained in, and I was a mental health first aid instructor at Berkeley. So back to your question, the person there, I think they should always be accompanied by a police if they come. But when I called the person in Berkeley and I was referred to them by the police, because these cities are relatively modest in size, they know many of the homeless and mentally ill people. So they are practically every time I've ever had to speak to that mental health advocate, they go, what does the person look like? And then they go, oh, I know who that is. I know where that person sleeps. I know where they last got service. So one of the things they have is they often have a relationship. And this person came and gave me a consultation. She said, next time, don't walk up to him and say, follow our rules or you're gonna have to leave. She said, some people write them a letter, slide the letter on the desk and just say, I know you wanna stay, but you're doing this, and just walk away. That was something I never knew. But she knew this from working with people. So they are invaluable. However, there are some people who, if you don't have the police who have the authority to use force if necessary, like the guy who challenged me to a fight on the street, he would not have left, I don't think, if the police hadn't come and said, you got to go right now. Now, I don't think he wanted to hurt anyone. I just think that he was like, well, if I don't see somebody in uniform who's going to make me get up and go, I'm just going to keep making a scene and I'm just going to keep threatening people because that's the vocabulary that I have. So I think in an ideal situation, the mental health advocate comes, they have the police officer with them to stand back and provide support in case things get out of control, but at a safe distance where they can talk to the person, especially if they have a relationship and they know the tools to de-escalate. And the vast majority of the time, I think they'll be able to get the people to leave. But you do need the police officer there in case. That's my observation.
Got it.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Rod, I see your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Thank you. James, just echoing what was already been stated in terms of your sharing those experiences. It seems like obviously overwhelmingly 99.999% of the time you're able to diffuse these situations through your experience, through the training you've received, which is fantastic. And, the relationships that the law has with some of these people. I'm just wondering, if there were a situation where there was imminent danger, I mean, do you feel as though, the mechanism is in place for that to be handled? I mean, whether it's, everyone can dial 911, but is there like a panic button that can be pressed or something like that? If it's,
yes,
there is.
Yes, the reference desk and most reference desks at libraries have a panic button. And they sometimes have two, where either they have a button that calls for backup from staff in the back, just to say, I need someone out here to assist me. It's not necessarily an emergency. But most libraries have, and we have a button at the reference desk that goes directly to emergency.
And you feel, oh, go ahead.
And that's in case, say, of a mass shooting.
Yeah.
Where you can't talk on the phone, you just got to push the button. And that means that the police are going to come prepared to confront a perhaps dangerous or violent situation. And I've never really seen that used, thank God.
And you feel is the same degree of safety, kind of silly question, but I presume also at the branches? I mean, you have no qualms about the safety at the branches and the people that are kind of the leaders, to go back to what you said minutes ago about the leaders, everything's good?
Here's what I feel, Rod. I feel that we've done everything in our power to make people as safe as possible for working in a public setting. We work in a public setting, and if someone wants to harm us because they're mad about something, they know where we work, and they can come in any day. It's impossible to keep someone out. We encourage staff to walk together to their cars, in the parking lot. I've never seen anyone, I've heard a couple of stories of someone, and you're talking about millions of interactions.
Yeah.
But I've heard a couple of stories of someone actually punching a staff person. My old director in Portland told me that happened, and it upset her so much that she was thinking about retiring. We've noticed, older librarians say they notice a change in social mores, certain things that people didn't do or say before in a public space, they do. They're fraying at the threads of our social fabric. So we are as safe as possible, but at the end of the day, if that guy who said he was going to kill me, and I use that word deliberately because I want people to know that I get called that at my job sometimes. And the way it works is this: if someone is upset and they don't have tools for expressing that, they call you the name that they think is most hurtful. So if you're Black, they call you the N word. If you're gay, they call you the F word. If you're a woman, they call you the B word. And you pretty much know this person does not have good coping skills. And they may not be a horrible person, but they feel hurt and they're trying to hurt me. But if one of those people decide to come back and say, and do that, there's very little protection, Rod. There's really none. You know, in the case of my situation in Portland, they sent me to another branch out, and they had me go there for a month. And one of the most wonderful things about that was people in that community who knew me and witnessed that, they came out to that branch and they said, you know, we want you to come back. And this is not what our community is about. And we're sick. We're sickened by that. But if that guy decided to wait until I was going to my car at night, or just come in the library while I was at the desk, there's very little you can do against that. But what we are taught is that if someone threatens imminent physical harm, that we are first supposed to try, you know, basic self-defense. First, you're supposed to just do your best and just get away, just walk away. 99.9% of the time, if you walk away, they do nothing. And obviously, if someone is trying to harm you, you are allowed to use as much force as you need to or can to stop them. Most people at the library are not interested in engaging in that sort of stuff. So in a way, there's just a degree of manageable risk, I guess.
Well, I'm pleased to know, perhaps I should have. I'm pleased to know there's the panic button.
Yeah.
And I would concur with what Liz said earlier, and you have something in terms of some kind of log. I mean, you know, there's always kind of incrementalism. I mean, people, you know, they do one, then they do another. It kind of escalates where you kind of probably would get into that area of real severe potential danger and something like that, which sounds like you have some version could at least record things so you can track if someone's, you know, possibly headed down that horrific road that we don't want to discuss. But thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And I think this has been just a wonderful time for all of us to learn and get further into how we can support the library. So thank you, James.
Sure, you're welcome.
And I guess I can open it up to public comment, see if there is any public comment. And if there is not, let's close it back and ask if there's any final comment from anyone before we go on to updates. Lester.
Thank you, Lisa. So when I suggested we have this discussion, it sort of stemmed from the rules of conduct policy and what is, you know, that third level of situation, James, you talked about, like, you know, the language states that the library will call the police department. And, you know, like, one question in my mind was, like, is this leading to too many arrests? You've answered that, it's really not. The second was, well, now that we have this new resource, how can we make better use of this? You know, should that replace the police? Based on your comments, I don't think it should replace the police, but I'm wondering if we should, so I think on the left is I'm wondering if we should, it still seems there's room to kind of mention that resource, that mental health outreach person in the policies, that, you know, perhaps the library will, you know, it feels like it seems appropriate, so like the library will call the police and the mental health person, you know, when appropriate. You know, it may be, you know, like I said, it's maybe 2/3 symbolic, 1/3 practical, but I think, you know, it's just, I think it's a good stance for us to take of, like, you know, we're modernizing, it's a more modern approach to handling these situations. And also just to kind of like promote the fact that our city has been very forward-looking and progressive and has created this position. So we can do our part, our small part, but still our part in making everyone aware of this. That's kind of where I ended up. So that's my comment.
I would even suggest, even, you know, I would even take it one step further. You know, I've said this, you know, I invite some of our police officers as well as the mental health support person to even do some of their office hours at the library. And that is not to send a message of, oh, you better be careful. It's more to say this is community policing. You know, If you're here, you see the police officer, you see him just doing some of his office work, you know he's gonna be here. That I think builds some trust and can build a relationship. And you know, some libraries have very big problems, but they also have a lot of money, like San Francisco. They've hired a full-time mental health person. They also got in-house security. We don't have those issues here. But if the mental health person were there some time of the day and they could see how things flow, that could be very helpful. The main emphasis is this: is these situations are acute in San Mateo. They're daily in San Francisco. They are acute here. And even in the toughest situations, the vast majority of people, it's no problem. You know, they're wonderful. They're respectful, you know, so it's up to, I'm open if you all want to have that policy discussion, if you think that would be, if that would maybe take some of the edge off of it and demonstrate that we are taking a holistic approach as opposed to a punitive approach, because I don't think the police want to be called to come and have to get physical with someone either.
Well, what does everyone else think? I mean, I'm supportive of that, but I'm curious what my fellow trustees think.
Other comments? I guess I would be supportive of it, provided that we don't lock things down, that we leave a lot of flexibility. Because I think one of the things I'm hearing from James and his relationship here with the San Mateo Police, as well as his experiences elsewhere, is that magic is in what is unwritten and what you don't know, and how people react together. So I would just hate to have policies written that would tie hands. Supporting, encouraging, yes, but there's going to be a lot we can't possibly understand. And I wonder if there is, short of a policy, something where we can give our support, our encouragement to the kind of behavior and interaction, James, that you're talking about, whether it needs to be codified to the nth degree. It's a question.
I might add that I still think that the discussion on the mental health advocate is still happening. And I for one don't know exactly how they're going to work with the police. So perhaps the policy discussion would be more fruitful once that is clarified.
Okay. Don.
I think it might be premature because of that situation now. I think it would be very healthy for the conversation that we've had today that also included police officers talking about our situation in the library, but just in general, promoting the idea of community policing that extends to the library might be worth doing.
Okay, hold that thought until we get to suggestions for future meetings. Thank you. Okay, any other comments before we close this out? No. James, thank you.
You're welcome.
Please thank
Thank you.
all the staff for what goes on every day and how they do use their emotional intelligence as well as all their training to really do the best for our community.
Will do.
So with that, I think we turn it over to updates. And why don't we give James a chance to rest his voice for a second? And Sunil, since you have been so patient here for such a long time, why don't we ask you to start off the update and tell us all about what was a fairly amazing event last week that we all would love to hear more about.
Yeah, thank you. And no, not a problem at all. And James, I'll just echo what everybody else said. Thanks for your candor and sharing just everything that you and your team do at the library that we never see. And yeah, so our gala turned out to be a bigger success than we could have imagined. We had over 200 individual registrants, so it's hard to understand how many eyeballs you really had on the screen, but over 200 registrants, and just under that number actually logged on during the event. So a fantastic opportunity. It was really for those of you who were able to join. Thank you for participating and seeing, and thank you to James and to Rod for your cameos. That was fun. I think next year we just do an hour of the outtakes and just do it that way. But it was a great celebration of the library in my view, and I thought that was sort of unique. And while we certainly enjoyed the the authors and hearing from them, and just an incredible group of women authors that I could have listened to that for a long time. Hopefully celebration of the library and all the great work it's done in this, it always does, but especially in this last year, sort of came through in the video, because that was certainly the tone. And, final numbers are still kind of being worked out, but we certainly surpassed the expectations we'd sort of set for ourselves. And we'll hopefully, in fact, I have an email down here that I'm kind of staring at. We'll have here in the next hour or two kind of those final numbers, but just a great opportunity for us to reach out to a bunch of folks that we normally don't, right? Because when you have a normal gala, you're confined to space limitations and things of that nature. We reached out to a lot of people who probably wouldn't have come to a gala. And so making sure that we utilize that information to reach out to them and perhaps form relationships between them and the library would be the next step for us.
Great, thank you. I know it was an amazing event. So Liz, why don't we go over to you for updates and ideas for future meetings?
Sure, I was happy to attend the whole gala. I thought it was very, very well done. So kudos to everybody for that. I attended a biotech program. I was very interesting on virology and COVID, and I'm always amazed at the quality of the speakers that Michelle Gauthier is able to get. This was I think at Columbia University professor, and with many, many, many things that he can add to his name, but it was very interesting. And one topic for an agenda I'd like to add, I sent James just recently an email, but I don't know if all of you know that the fish market next to the Marina branch is closed, and that there are developers who are interested in putting townhomes and building out that whole piece of land. And I've really been haunted since we met at the Marina branch. I don't know how long ago that was now, a year and a half ago probably, at that sloping floor. And anyway, so I would love to continue to talk in future meetings about what we're going to do. There might be a really good opportunity, I don't know, with these developers to make a big change that might lead to a better building somewhere in the neighborhood. But there's just so much to talk about, but clearly something needs to be done, I think. And when I saw the plan, you can go online to see one of the developers' plans. The townhomes, but go all the way up to the parking lot for the Marina branch. So anyway, I think it's interesting. I think that could be an opportunity. And yeah, that's all I have.
Great suggestion. Thank you very much. Okay, Don, why don't we turn to you next for your update?
I don't have much to report other than what I mentioned earlier. I've had a number of conversations with age-friendly task force leader Monica, and I've been doing some thinking and a tiny bit of writing with that, and that's about it.
Well, I look forward to what you keep thinking about. You've got the passion, so please keep bringing it to us. Rod, over to you, Mr. Video Magnet here.
That's right. I was going to send my people to be at this meeting instead of me, but I decided to grace you with my presence, Lisa. No, I just want to say I did really enjoy tremendously the opportunity to be a part of that, working with Alexandra, Diane, and a little bit of the planning, but more so to have that little role was a treat because it was, a lot of some of what's been said earlier tonight is, had been alluded to what I talked about, which was the individual stories. I mean, that makes the library, and it is a civic treasure. That's not just a trite phrase; it truly is. So it was a great pleasure to kind of convey that. In terms of things to look forward to, I think possibly the reopening, whatever form that takes, and whatever it is, I think that's an opportunity to kind of do a celebration of some type. I mean, it's easy for me to say that, but the details would have to be fleshed out. But I think it's really would be a great opportunity to, again, kind of showcase we're back. This is what we're doing. This is all we have. And it's kind of a rebirth of the city in many ways, because it is such a place that so many people look to. I want to reiterate what kind of Don mentioned last time in terms of education components to the meetings. I would like, and maybe I should just do this offline with James, maybe an education component for better on the branches. I mean, my knowledge of the branches is very limited, so I should probably just sit with him and learn more about that. But some of these other things we've talked about, I'm sure there are many things that we could have as components of the meeting. And then finally, and this has been talked about, having these people on screens and such. I think and even having the policeman there, I think the library just does present such a truly unique opportunity to showcase X, whatever X is. I mean, we could have something where throughout the year we kind of rotate, or not we, but there could be things rotate, because it is such a thing where all different cross sections, facets of the community, they gather, they come by, they're in and out. And in that kind of a forum, I think mentally, psychologically, people would be really conducive to listening and learning and seeing, and it could really be a very, very great benefit in many ways to a lot of things. So anyway, that's what I have. And thanks again, James, for your sharing, your efforts, your commitment in so many ways. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Rod. Lester.
I think just echoing a couple of previous suggestions. I think to Don's point, when the mental health advocate has worked out some of the details with how they interact with the police department, it'd be great to have them come by and sort of educate us on how that works. And to Liz's point, it has been I guess it feels like it's been almost 2 years since Director Kanzian came by and talked about the combined Parks and Rec and Marina branch effort, and I've kind of lost track of it. So I don't know if there's an opportune time for her to come back and give an update. So yeah, I think same topic Liz mentioned, but I just realized it's been a while since we heard about that.
And would there be interest as well in what's been going on at both branches, so Hillsdale as well as Marina, because it's been that long since we did that. So, James.
Somebody's kitty is talking. So I just wanted to share, where's my update? I just wanted to share that something, that's still before the pandemic, Rod, this predates you. The trustees were starting to revamp policies. Our policies are reviewed and, if necessary, revamped every 5 years. I think they had gotten to work and they were able to finish a couple, but there's still about 9 or 10 policies that need to be reviewed and updated. And so just for future agenda items, I would like to put that on your radar, and I can send out the names of the policies or some way share the policies, however you want to do it, if you want to start that back up again, or at least start talking about it. I shared that the African American Cultural Committee will be is planning a program for March 20th. I will share the marketing materials as soon as they come out. March 4th, Michelle Balte, who puts on a lot of our biotech programs, held a program called the Genome Odyssey. There were 88 registrants and 71 people showed up for that virtual event featuring Dr. Iwan Ashley, and there were rave reviews. In addition, Michelle recently did a survey. I shared with you all the survey that Adriana did, which was pretty thoughtful and pretty involved for children's services to get feedback on, you know, how we were doing and what people prefer and what people don't like so much. Michelle did a recent much shorter survey on what health and wellness programs patrons are interested in and questions like what their preferred times are. I was thinking about you, Liz, because I was down in our makerspace, and we have 2 3D printers that kids can actually put their hands on, and that place is filling up with a lot of interesting tools and toys. Now, I know it won't help Peyton very much because he probably doesn't want to be in that area of the library. But hopefully we can get something like that that's more accessible for the teens, or they just go to the computer lab. But I like the way the makerspace is filling out. And we recently had a program called B-Bots. And B-Bots is a colorful, easy to operate robots that teach children basic programming skills, such as sequencing, estimation, problem solving, and just having fun. The program is tailored towards kids in kindergarten up to 3rd grade. And so we're filling out that maker space. They've been doing it even while I've been up in my office, and sometimes you go down and you go, wow, they have all this stuff. There's a sewing machine there. There's art. It's very much STEAM. So, you know, it's art, there's learning how to make things, there's math, so we look forward to adding to some more to that with the success of this year's funding need. And that's what I got.
You haven't been busy. Not at all. Okay, well, I would, before I just add my comment, Dina, is there anything that you would like to add? Because you are so in the pulse with the library staff.
Just that I thought the gala was great too. It's the first time I've attended the gala, and it was really fun.
Yeah.
You guys did a great job.
Thank you, and thank you for everything you do for all of us as well. You're just tremendous.
Back at all of you.
No. So I also want to add my just kudos to everybody on the foundation staff and the library staff for what happened with the gala. I was just so impressed. And since I live in Baywood, which is where the main branch is, we did a lot of promotion of the gala. And a lot of people initially said to me, well, I don't know, this online thing, I don't know. But boy, we got such fantastic feedback afterwards. So I would really encourage future galas. Yes, absolutely, let's all get back together, but figure out a way to have a virtual component so that we can reach out to so many more people in the community than we normally can. And I know that's already Bible chapter and verse for the foundation and the staff, but really want to underline that. Number 2, James, we're just going to say thank you again and again for not just tonight and what you've said, but for how you enter every conversation, every situation with honesty, with heart, with mind, with really just the desire to want to do the best for the entire community, your employees, your colleagues, your patrons, your board, the city staff. I don't think we recognize that enough. We have been blessed to have you be part of our community, and we look forward to working with you going forward. That's just something I think we need to say to you a whole lot, a lot.
Thank you, Lisa. I feel embraced by this community. And one thing about working at libraries is that I've been able to become a part of some communities that have left an indelible impression on me, and overwhelmingly, it has confirmed my belief that most people, most of the time, are pretty darn good, you know, are really good, most people, most of the time. And I feel very good about my role here, my position. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I appreciate this community.
We are here to support you.
Thank you.
One question that I would like to add to the future
Mhm.
is, as it's time appropriate, what are we going to do with all this amazing money that the foundation raised? When the foundation does get it together and think through it, and how can we input that? How can we be supportive? Because it was a very broad mandate
Mhm.
to raise money for, which is good. It leaves the foundation a lot of flexibility and the library staff. But as we can be involved in that discussion and give you feedback, I think it's a real opportunity to leapfrog some things. So
I would love that, and I will take your suggestions to heart, and I will make sure that they are evaluated. And I think that some good things can come from that. I would love that feedback. That would help a lot as we chart our course for the year ahead.
yeah, so that was my suggestion. So just wrapping things up in terms of items for future agendas, and I don't know that there's a specific time for many of these, but I heard let's invite the mental health specialist who's going to be working with the police to come and speak to us and share the plans and also get feedback from us about the library. I also heard having Director Kanzian come and have a discussion with James about what is the future of the Marina branch and the library and the community center. And it's probably a different evolved discussion versus what we heard before, because it's been a lot of time and things have changed. I also heard, excuse me, that's my dog, James's suggestion that perhaps, James, that's the best way to do it, to share the policies that still need to be discussed, and getting feedback from the board as to how do we go about discussing these policies and in what order. I think that would be a good discussion based on getting information from you. Yeah, and then finally, how can we input, how we use the funds that do come over to the library to the best. So I don't see that any of these, I mean, the mental health advocate is going to be a time we have to wait for that to happen. So that's a future policy, or future discussion, but we'd very much like to go on record, I believe. The future policies, I think, James, perhaps if you can circulate the policies, we can put forward to the board having discussion of the future policies, in which order we discuss them at the next meeting. And excuse me, the discussion from Director Kanzian, I think it's based on when that is appropriate, whether that's next time or future, but that we should go on record.
Okay.
So I guess the best way to go forward would be to, I don't know whether we can do a combined motion or we can go through every single individual one of these policies and whether, or excuse me, discussions and future meeting agendas. Number one, did I leave anything out? And number two, thoughts about how to go forward and vote on this for future meetings. So number one, did I leave anything out that people want to have on future agendas? Okay. Then number two, can I ask for a motion to discuss how we deal with outstanding policies at our next meeting.
Well, sure, let me make a substitute. So I move that we discuss the order of policy revisions at a next meeting and the mental health advocate and the update from Director Kansian at a future meeting at a time to be determined by the president and the city librarian.
Thank you. Thank you, Lester. Is there a second to that motion?
I would second that motion.
Thank you, Don. Then Dina, if you could do a roll call, please.
Okay, one quick question. Did we also want to include in the motion the funds and how you were gonna, was that also going to be in that motion for future topics?
I did not. So what is? So someone can substitute motion, or we can do it in two goes.
Okay, we'll do that next. Okay, I'll take a poll then on the first one. Dr. Lester Chin, what is your vote?
Aye.
Don Hill, what is your vote?
Aye.
Lisa Diaz-Nash, what is your vote?
Aye.
Elizabeth Winter, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Rodlin Harris, what is your vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
And I guess I would put forward a suggestion for a future meeting to be determined by the foundation and the staff, having a presentation about the thinking about how to use these funds so that the library board has an opportunity to react to that recommendation and give any further feedback that we would have.
I second the motion.
Thank you.
Okay, Lisa Diaz-Nash, what is your vote?
Aye.
Don Hill, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Elizabeth De Winter, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Dr. Lester Chin, what is your vote?
May surprise everyone. I'm going to abstain. I think I'm not as much as I argue for policy things. I don't know. I can't put it into words, but I don't. I think we accept gifts, but I don't know we advise on them. I think it's a little bit different than Measure S. So I'm confused enough that I'll just abstain.
And I guess I would just clarify, I'm not saying that my recommendation was more, let's get an update on what's happening, as opposed to setting down a policy. That's not our job to set that policy, but I think it would be good to understand what the thinking is, and if there's anything we can contribute to that, that would be a good topic. So, but Lester is abstaining. Rod, oh, excuse me. Sorry, Dina.
And Rodlin Harris, what is your vote?
You know, actually, I had the same question as Lester. I was unclear on, can I ask a question now, or am I just supposed to vote now? I mean, what exactly would I be voting on right now? What is, because I'm kind of splitting hairs in my mind. I want to make sure I'm understanding and responding correctly.
My intention for raising the motion was that at a future meeting, we get an update from the foundation and staff as to their ideas and what they want to be doing with the funds.
May I just speak?
Yeah.
I kind of understand the confusion. I think in the past, we normally, like years ago, we wouldn't weigh in on this. But I know in the last few years, Lynn has, and the prior president have wanted our input and our suggestions and ideas of what we thought some of the money should go to. But it was for the funding need before the gala, I think.
Yeah, it's.
So this is kind of, yeah, I understand why you guys are like, well, but I think, Lisa, you're just saying you want an agenda item on basically how much money was raised, and maybe from James on how he might.
What's going to happen with it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that it's like that's my crux there. It's how much money we have, what is being suggested, kind of period. So we're
Mhm.
just listening. We're not
Way.
providing we're just listening. They make it, in essence, to distill it, we're going to have kind of a presentation, although it wouldn't be that formal. This is how much money, this is what we're thinking about, period.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also think this too, it's not binding. Like, you all can give me your some thoughts or opinions. I can handle that. It may help inform, the decision that we make or whatever. So I understand it's not like a situation where you're telling the library, like, this is what you have to spend the money on. But if I just present the information and you don't provide feedback, that's fine. But if you want to, I'm okay with that.
Then I will vote.
I'm sorry, is this something we even need to vote on? Because usually the foundation has a particular part in our agenda where they present their report. Is it just kind of part of the report?
I
don't know.
guess I just want to make sure that we hear, because it was such a big deal and it was such a great outcome. I just want to make sure that that does happen, the update.
That can happen. I don't know if it needs to even be voted on. I think it could just be something that Lynn or I provide an update on. Or if it does need to be voted on, I guess we could move it to next month, since we need to clarify some things.
No, if we don't need to vote on it, that's fine. Just
Mhm.
I'm interested in making sure that it's, it is part of the presentation.
Sure. I'm glad to share that information. I'm sure Lynn is glad to share an update. It's a substantial amount of money. So we should give an idea to you all what we're thinking.
If we're voting, I'm going to vote aye. Thank you.
Dean, I'll let you figure that one out. But, okay, so is there anything else that we need to discuss before we adjourn for the
I
evening?
just had a comment coming up through my head. We've praised lots of people tonight, all well deserved. And I'm thinking that I've never said, and I like to say now, Dina is a real foundation for a lot of us, and she's quietly supporting us. And so I want to include her in the list of people we really appreciate.
Bravo.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It's not that I can't tell her again, but I tell her weekly, probably. I hope. I should.
And thank you, everyone, for all you do.
And that's a lovely way to end the meeting, unless someone has something else to say. No?
Just embarrassed, So help me out here, Don. I move that we formally express our appreciation to Dina for her many years of past service and hopefully to many more.
And I second that motion. Dina, you have to do roll call. Yes.
Do I really take a vote on that?
Yes, so we forced your hand. There's a motion and a second, and it has to be recorded.
Okay, Dr. Lester Chen, what is your vote?
Aye.
Lisa Diaz-Nash, what is your vote?
Absolutely.
Elizabeth De Winter, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Don Hill, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Rodlin Harris, what is your vote?
I have a question. No, aye. Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. All right, well, thank you everyone for yet another good session. James, thank you for bringing us so much good content to talk about. Sunil, thank you, and all your partners for an incredible gala and what that means for the library. Thank you all for
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
responsible trustees. Okay, 8:06, we are out of here.